Was that supposed to be cosplay, Grandpa? Or did Halloween come early? The jeering voice sliced through the quiet hum of the corner mart. 3 seconds later, a silence would fall so heavy you could hear boots on linoleum and it wouldn't be his. The young cashier, no older than 20 and high on attitude, curled his lip as he stared at the patch sewn onto the threadbare bomber jacket of one Mr. Leon Grizz Maddox. The patch, a faded, scuffed symbol of a unit emblem long retired an eagle mid-dive, talons out. The cashier's fingers twitched, inches from yanking it. Some kind of biker club, old man? Or just clinging to your glory days? Leon, 78, former special reconquiet, unreadable, scarred in more ways than one agently recoiled his arm like a man dodging a landmine. That patch is not for grabbing, kid. It earned its place. The boy scoffed. Looks like a souvenir from a garage sale. You guys wore that back when dinosaurs walked? 5 minutes later, just as Leon was calmly handing over cash for his black coffee, the bell above the entrance chimed. 3 men marched in tall, sharp, and regulation, pressed in fresh camo fatigues. They didn't glance at the shelves. They didn't pause. They positioned themselves behind Leon like sentinels locking formation, silent, watchful. Their eyes drilled into the cashier with a chill that could freeze lava. If you believe respect isn't something to be bargained, and the symbols of service still hold power-type respect below, Leon Maddox was a relic not of war stories, but of war itself. Built of grit, ghosts, and gravel-thick patience, his life began in the jungles of Cambodia, with maps that disintegrated in the rain and ended 3 decades later after dozens of silent, nameless operations across continents no one would ever admit to. In the ranks of covert ops, he was a living legend, an operator's operator. The creases in his face weren't just wrinkles. They were carved paths of decades spent crawling through wet dirt, braving icy ravines, and watching too many friends go home in boxes. His spine now slightly bowed from decades of rucksack burdens heavier than the punk behind the counter could lift in his best dream. He kept to himself, no retired, in a modest 2-room flat near the outskirts of Denton Falls. He had routines, like the disciplined ghost of his former self. Early morning walks, a little stretching to keep his shrapnel-kissed joints from locking, volunteer time at the Legion Hall. And every morning at 7:12 sharp, his cup of black coffee from the Liberty gas stop, 3 blocks from home. Leon didn't believe in putting his medals on display. They sat in an old cigar box under his bed. He didn't talk much about what he'd done, unless another ghost happened to sit beside him, beer in hand, trading silent nods and quiet stories that never needed full telling. But the patch? That patch stayed on his sleeve. It wasn't standard issue anymore, hadn't been since 1993. It was the emblem from his final field mission, a piece of stitched history that had once sat over his heart in places where he'd learned not to blink. Worn, sun-bleached, edges curling but sacred. Not vanity, not bragging rights, just memory. Today, like every other Tuesday, the Liberty gas stop buzzed with its regular chaos. A pair of HVAC techs grabbing energy drinks, a dad buying school snacks, the hum of the coolers and faint radio static. Leon gave a nod to Miss Clarice, who came in every morning to grab scratch-offs and milk. She returned the nod with a smile, an old routine between old souls. Usually, Linda, warm, chatty woman in her 40s, manned the register. But today, she was out. In her place, a kid. Pale, fidgety, oily hair, slicked back with overconfidence. Probably just finished high school, trying to look busy while counting the minutes. His name tag said, Brent. Leon fixed his coffee, added 1 sugar cube same as always, and stepped to the counter. Brent barely glanced up, one hand on the register, the other holding his phone up like it was sacred scripture. Tick-tock probably. Just the coffee, Leon said quietly, placing the $5 on the counter. Brent's eyes flicked to Leon, then fixated on the frayed patch. His lip curled into a half smirk. 175, he said lazily, barely breaking eye contact with his screen. As Leon reached for his change, Brent leaned forward, gaze still glued to the patch. Yo, he said, a smirk creeping wider. What's that supposed to be? Costume? Or just, holding on to your little army fantasy pops? Leon paused. He'd heard worse. ignored worse, but something about the boy's tone mocking, loud enough to draw the attention of others sitched just under the skin. "It's from my service, son," Leon said, voice low but steady. Brent snorted. "Service? What, like lawn service?" He let out a short laugh, playing to the imaginary crowd in his mind. Before Leon could respond, before instinct wrapped in decades of discipline could stop the old reflex, Brent reached out, quick, thoughtless, and grabbed at the patch. "Let's take a closer look at Grandpa's souvenir," Brent muttered, reaching forward with mocking curiosity, his smirk inches from Leon's sleeve. Leon's reaction was instant reflex, born of muscle memory, and muscle memory born of war. He jerked his arm back, sharp and precise. The movement was accompanied by a sudden tonal shift in his voice, a voice that had once commanded silence under gunfire. "Don't touch that, son." The words were iron, stripped of warmth. "It's not a joke. That means something." The quiet gravity in Leon's voice rattled Brent for a heartbeat. His hand froze, his smirk hesitated. But arrogance is a persistent disease in the young. Brent leaned back, his lips curling again with smug confidence, brushing off the warning like lint on his apron. "Oh, please," he sneered, pitch rising in mockery. "It means something," he mimicked, sounding like a bad cartoon. "It's just a rag, man. Probably made in a sweatshop like everything else. Get over it." He folded his arms, leaning against the counter like he owned the world, entirely unaware of how quiet the store had become. The air had shifted. A tension hung in it, felt but unspoken. Clarice, who'd been watching from the milk fridge, looked horrified. One of the HVAC techs muttered under his breath, shaking his head. But no one spoke up. No one challenged the boy's arrogance. Leon stood there, silent, one hand still lightly covering the patch on his sleeve as if to shield it from the venom. His jaw clenched. His back, usually bent from age, felt a little straighter. But there was a tremor in his hand, a slight one, invisible to most. This wasn't just about him anymore. That piece of cloth, that weathered patch, it had been with him in a Blackhawk pinned down in the mountains of Kunar. It had watched comrades bleed out, held together more by courage than body armor. It had seen nights filled with gunfire and prayers, had soaked in his sweat, dust, and more than one friend's blood. It wasn't just cloth. It was memory, pain, duty, and survival. To have it pawed, mocked, and spat on by some smug cashier who'd never heard the words "cover fire" was like watching someone stomp on a headstone. Leon closed his eyes and took in a long breath, forcing calm into his bones. Lashing out wouldn't help. It would only turn him into what Brent expected him to be, a cranky old relic no one listened to. He picked up his change, lifted his coffee. His voice when it came was low and gravel-deep. "You've got a lot to learn about respect, young man." He didn't wait for a reply. He didn't give Brent the satisfaction. With quiet dignity, Leon turned and walked out, the kids' laughter echoing faintly behind him. Outside, the morning air was sharp but not cool enough to extinguish the fury twisting inside his gut. He made it to the edge of the parking lot and sat on a low brick ledge, the coffee untouched, his hands resting on his knees. He stared down at the patch again, the frayed threads, the softened color. "Just a piece of cloth," Brent had said. But Leon wasn't in Denton Falls anymore. He was back in the dark mud of Hargesh province, crouched over a bleeding private who clutched a similar patch to his chest as if it were armor. He remembered the scream of incoming, the medevac delay, the hopelessness in that kid's eyes when he realized help wouldn't come in time. Leon snapped himself back to the present, with a small shake of the head. He couldn't let this go. Not this time. This wasn't about an old man getting offended. This was about memory, honor, the kind that mattered more than most people remembered. He thought briefly about yelling at the kid, reporting him to some manager if one even existed in that sad little store. But that would lead nowhere. Brent wouldn't learn a thing. He'd laugh, maybe record it for social media clout. The world wouldn't blink. But there were other options. Leon reached into his coat and pulled out his phone. Not a smartphone, not even close. A beat-up flip phone scarred, ancient, loyal. It wasn't fast, but it held the numbers that mattered. He scrolled past names that no longer answered, past the number for the VA, past the line for the Legion Hall. He stopped at an entry labeled simply, Garrison HQ Duty. It had been a while. Years, probably. Last time he'd called was to arrange a color guard for a memorial parade. Was this situation worth that call? He thought of Brent's fingers grabbing the patch, the sneer, the hollow echo of his laughter bouncing off silent walls. Yes, it was worth it. He hit call. The line connected on the second ring. Fort Matthews Garrison Headquarters. Staff Sergeant Miller speaking. How may I direct your call? Leon straightened unconsciously, his voice sharpening with old command. Staff Sergeant Miller, he said. This is Sergeant Major Leon Maddox, retired. I need to report an incident involving public disrespect toward the United States flag and a military veteran. The incident occurred at Liberty Gas Stop, corner of Franklin and Ridge, just outside base property. He paused, then laid out the facts, not the emotion, not the anger, just the facts. What Brent had done, what he had said, and why it mattered. Staff Sergeant Miller didn't speak at first, just the quiet, rhythmic clicking of a keyboard on the other end of the line. Then his voice returned calm, clear, all business. Understood, Sergeant Major Maddox. Your position is verified. Please remain visible and safe. This report is being escalated immediately. Incidents involving disrespect toward our flag or our veterans are taken with utmost seriousness. Expect a follow-up present shortly. Thank you for your call. The line clicked off. Leon sat still for a moment, phone in hand, unsure exactly what follow-up presence meant in this context. But the precision in Miller's tone left no doubt that something was already in motion. He stayed on the brick ledge just outside the Liberty Gas Stop, his eyes fixed calmly on the store's front entrance. The calm that settled over him wasn't resignation, it was resolution. He'd done what needed to be done. It was in the right hands now. Inside, Brent the cashier hadn't missed a beat. If anything, he'd doubled down, animatedly retelling the showdown to a delivery driver who had just wheeled in a crate of energy drinks. Brent had adjusted the story to cast himself as the clever victor, mocking Leon's age and exaggerated seriousness. The delivery driver offered a few polite laughs, though his expression flickered between discomfort and boredom. Brent leaned against the counter, riding the high of his delusional triumph. In his mind, he'd shut down a cranky old geezer with nothing but sarcasm and swagger. He was mid-sentence aright, in the middle of a reenactment, complete with a mock limp and high-pitched voice when something shifted. The deliveryman's attention had suddenly moved past Brent, toward the store's glass front door. His eyes widened. His hand slowly lowered the clipboard. The bell above the door didn't just ring. It snapped. The door opened with a confident, deliberate, chimeless, like a customer entering and more like a statement being made. 3 men stepped in. Army, dressed in crisp digital camo, boots clean enough to see reflections in, their posture straight, shoulders squared, movements smooth and efficient like a practiced drill. The first bore the stripes of a staff sergeant's nameplate read, Ramirez. The other 2 wore specialist ranks, Specialist Chen and Specialist Jackson, young, sharp-eyed, silent. They didn't glance around, didn't wander to grab a soda or a snack. They walked in a single file toward the checkout counter, to the exact spot where Leon had stood minutes earlier. And they stopped absolutely still, forming a line just feet behind the register. Brent's voice died. He stared at them, and in that moment, every ounce of artificial confidence drained from his face like color from a photo. These weren't weekend warriors or National Guard volunteers at a recruitment drive. These were the real thing. Soldiers with purpose. Soldiers on a mission. Around them, the store fell into quiet. Again. The 2 HVAC workers lowered their donuts. Clarice stopped pretending to read the cover of a gossip magazine and turned toward the counter with wide, focused eyes. The delivery man, who had just arrived, suddenly remembered he had other stops and slipped silently out the back. The 3 soldiers didn't speak. They stood in parade rest, arms behind backs, feet apart, motionless, watching Brent, staring straight into him, and saying nothing. The silence weighed more than shouting ever could. Brent licked his lips. His throat moved as he swallowed. His hands twitched on the counter. Can I help you guys?" he asked, barely above a whisper. Staff Sergeant Ramirez didn't blink. When he finally spoke, his tone was low steady, but it hit like a hammer. "We're not here to make a purchase." He took a step forward, gaze locked. "We're here because a report was filed. A report involving an employee at this establishment showing open disrespect to a United States Army veteran, and more disturbingly, to the symbol of our nation he wears." Brent's skin went pale. His earlier cocky sneer now looked like something he couldn't remember how to make. He opened his mouth to protest, to spin it, but only stammered. "Look, I didn't mean, it was just a misunderstanding. The guy was—" Ramirez held up one gloved hand. That was all it took to silence him again. "There is no misunderstanding," he said, voice cold steel. "There is no gray area when it comes to respect, especially not toward what that flag represents, or those who serve beneath it." He took another step forward, eyes unwavering. "The man you insulted, Sergeant Major Leon Maddox, served this country for over 3 decades. He has carried wounded brothers out under fire. He has bled for that flag, watched others die beneath it. The emblem he wears on his jacket, that's not decoration. That's sacrifice stitched into fabric." He reached up and tapped the small, neatly folded flag, protruding from his shoulder, bouquet of vivid contrast to the old, worn patch Brent had mocked. "You mocked that. You grabbed it. You demeaned the man wearing it." Brent looked like he might collapse. His mouth moved, but the words wouldn't come. I didn't know," he finally sputtered. "You didn't care to know," came a second voice, Specialist Chen, calm but firm, every word slicing clean. "You saw an old man and thought you could clown him for likes and laughs." "You saw weakness," Ramirez added, stepping in close now. "But what you missed is that you were standing in the presence of something far stronger than your ignorance can measure." Brent backed up slightly, glancing left and right, hoping someone would intervene. No one moved. And Specialist Jackson? He hadn't said a word, just stared, eyes unblinking, expression unreadable, like judgment made flesh. Staff Sergeant Ramirez stared at Brent a long, pointed silence that landed with more force than any outburst ever could. His expression didn't need volume. It was a quiet rebuke carved in stone. Then, with his eyes still locked on the trembling clerk, Ramirez continued. "Sergeant Major Maddox didn't ask for an apology. He's not that kind of man. He reported this because, when the honor of the flag is compromised, it becomes his duty even in retirement." He slowly turned, addressing the store as a whole. His voice wasn't raised, but it filled the space with the weight of command. "This isn't just about one rude cashier in one gas station. It's about a growing mindset, this belief that respect is optional, that service is a costume, that sacrifice is a punchline. That," he said, locking eyes again with Brent, "is not acceptable." "We're not here to start trouble," Ramirez added. "We're here to make sure it doesn't happen again." Right then, the front door flew open with a sharp jingle, and a short, fast-moving man burst in. It was Mr. Malik, the store owner, a Pakistani immigrant with a deep reverence for the country that had given him a new life. He was still half-dressed in his delivery clothes, clearly rushed after a panicked call from Clarice. He froze as he took in the scene. 3 stone-faced soldiers, an ashen-faced clerk, and a half-circle of wide-eyed customers. "Officers," he said quickly, breath short, "what is going on here?" Ramirez turned to him and offered a respectful nod, his voice more measured now but still deliberate. He explained the situation in clear, professional detail, what had happened between Brent and the veteran, and the exact nature of the disrespect shown not just to a man, but to the flag he wore. Mr. Malik listened in horror. His expression darkened with every word. As soon as Ramirez finished, he turned to Brent, his voice rising with barely restrained fury. "Brent, is this true? Did you grab this veteran's jacket, mock him, insult the flag?" Brent looked like a man caught in a flash flood. He couldn't speak, couldn't move, just nodded, miserably. I was being stupid. he whispered, tears rising unbidden. Mr. Malik didn't hesitate. You're fired. Effective immediately. Pack your things and go. I will not allow this behavior in my store. Not toward any customer especially, not a man who's served this country. Then he turned to Ramirez and the other soldiers, bowing his head slightly, his voice soft but steady. Gentlemen, I'm so deeply ashamed this happened. Please extend my sincerest apologies to Sergeant Major Maddox. This is not who we are at Liberty. We honor our veterans here. Ramirez nodded. Thank you, Mr. Malik. Perhaps it's time to consider a bit of training for your staff on respect, on conduct, and on the significance of the symbols they so easily disregard. Absolutely, Malik agreed without pause. It'll be done. First thing. Without another word, Ramirez, Chen, and Jackson turned as one and walked out. No shouting, no flourish. Just a clean, silent exit leaving behind a room forever changed by their presence. Outside, Leon Maddox watched them emerge from his place on the brick wall. He hadn't moved. He didn't need to. As Ramirez passed, their eyes met. Ramirez gave him a subtle nota, quiet salute of equals. Then the three soldiers climbed into a waiting military Humvee that had pulled up quietly along the curb. The vehicle pulled away without a sound, leaving behind a silence filled not with tension, but with reflection. Leon sat still for a beat longer. Then he looked down at his now cold coffee, took a sip, and for the first time that morning, it didn't taste bitter. Mr. Malik came rushing out moments later, full of apologies and insistence that Leon come inside for a fresh capon the house, of course, and anything else he might want. Leon smiled, nodded, and followed him back inside, though he waved off the pastries. True to his word, Mr. Malik spent the next few days personally training every staff member new and old in proper customer conduct, with an added emphasis on the meaning behind military service and the symbols that represent it. As for Brent, he was seen a week later filling out job applications at fast food joints and retail counters across town quietly, humbly, and with far less certainty in his voice. Some lessons come hard. The story of the three soldiers, the gas station clerk, and the old man with the patch, spread quickly around Denton Falls and even made its way through the halls of Fort Resolute. It wasn't a tale of vengeance. It wasn't about flexing power. It was about a moment of truth, where dignity met ignorance and dignity didn't flinch. It became a quiet legend, one people repeated not to stir outrage, but to stir respect. Leon Maddox continued his morning walks, his coffee ritual, and his quiet life. He still didn't wear his medals on his chest, but he no longer hesitated to wear that patch. It had earned its place, and the world had remembered why. Because sometimes a piece of fabric is more than thread and color. Sometimes it's the weight of a nation's soul carried by those who swore to protect it. Subscribe to this channel if you believe respect is still worth standing for, and that the colors of sacrifice never fade.